Well, hey everybody, we are so excited that you're here for part number 2 of our series, One Step. And as we've been talking about this kind of idea, we've been talking about steps that we can make towards having a better tomorrow. Specifically looking at the topic of justice in our world. Now, as we defined justice last week, we defined justice this way, that it means something is right, fair, or equal. Something is right, fair, or equal. And so when we talk about justice, we're talking about moving towards a world that's really better for everyone. And we're talking about this idea of justice because we want to talk about working against injustice, which we define this way, which is when things are unfair, unequal, or not right. So justice means something is right, fair, or equal, and injustice is when things are unfair, unequal, or not right. Now, some of us, as we talk about this, we know this idea of injustice exists because we've heard about it. But some of us know it because we've experienced it firsthand. And others of us, we've literally lived in that state of injustice. And for some of us that are watching this today, maybe, justice means that we need somebody else to step in. We need somebody else to be a support or somebody else to help us because we're the ones experiencing injustice ourselves. And so I want you to think about our particular community for a second, the community where you currently are at. Many people in that community have experienced or are still experiencing some very real and very wrong and very painful injustices. We're talking about things like racism or oppression or discrimination or prejudice, and the list could go on and on. There are so many things that your friends, that people in your small group or others in, our student ministry are facing or dealing with. Injustice is happening to people that are watching this video right now. It's happening to people in our world, in our community, in our school, and in our churches. And no matter what the injustice is, if you've experienced it, you know how unfair it actually is. And you know how painful it really feels. You see, some of you watching this, maybe you felt some really strong emotions as a direct result of facing injustice in your lives. And you're probably wondering, if that's you, you may be sitting there and saying, okay, well, how can I move towards justice when injustice is happening to me? Now, before we go on, I just want to hit the pause button for a second, and I want you to know that if you are experiencing injustice, or if you have experienced injustice, please understand, you don't deserve the unfair, hurtful injustices that you've experienced. You have value because you're simply made in the image of God. And I want you to understand that you were created to be treated with respect because of the fact you are created in the image of God. And it's not your fault that you were born into a complicated world with messed up rules and traditions and ideas about people. And the painful things that you've actually experienced, they really say a whole lot more about the hurt people cause rather than they do saying something about you. And so if that's you and you've experienced injustice or you're experiencing injustice, I just want you to know our hearts go out to you. We want to do something to support you and help you. And so as we talk about this topic tonight, we want to spend some time looking at some people who needed justice in their personal circumstances. Now, in ancient times, there was this powerful king, and his name was Nebuchadnezzar. And he was really used to getting his way. He led the kingdom of Babylon, and as he led this kingdom, they would literally take control of most of the surrounding kingdoms and villages, which included at that time the Israelite community. And what he would do is, after they took over a particular area, he would bring the brightest and the strongest of the particular captured nation, in this particular case, the Israelite people, into Babylon. And he would help create this incredible culture and incredible city. Now, 3 of the guys that he brought from the nation of Israel into Babylon were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these guys worshiped the one true God. And so when Nebuchadnezzar decided to build this giant golden statue and ordered everybody to bow down and worship that statue whenever they heard music playing, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused. And you may say, well, that's good for them, right? Like, they held true to their beliefs and they didn't do that. But the people who were loyal to Nebuchadnezzar, they didn't agree. And so what they did is they basically went and they snitched on these three individuals to the king. And in a furious rage, the king orders Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be captured, to be brought to him. And he gives them one more chance to bow down and to worship the statue when they hear the music playing. But they knew that anybody who refused to bow down would be thrown into a blazing fire. Yet these three guys, knowing what the consequence would be, wouldn't worship anything or anyone other than their God. And so just like that, because they refused, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up and they were thrown into the fire. Now, as you hear that story, chances are you probably say, yeah, I get it. That's totally and completely unfair. What happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? It wasn't good, it wasn't right, and it certainly wasn't something that they deserved. But let's continue on in Daniel chapter 3 and look at how the story actually turned out. Because it says this, it says, "But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, 'Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?' 'Yes, your majesty, we certainly did,' they replied. 'Look,' Nebuchadnezzar shouted, 'I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god.' Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here.' So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. The high officers, officials, governors, advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, their clothing was not scorched, and they didn't even smell of smoke." Now, we're not entirely sure who was actually in the fire with the men. Was it God? Was it Jesus? Was it an angel? I'm not personally 100% sure, but one thing is absolutely clear. God did not allow these 3 individuals to be in it alone. God didn't allow them to suffer or to experience injustice by themselves. And that's a big deal because it shows not only is that true for them, but it's also true for us as well. In fact, you could actually say it this way, that you don't have to face injustice alone. You don't have to face injustice alone. In fact, by sending Jesus to the world, God made sure that we would never be alone when we face injustice. Jesus could have came onto the scene as a conquering king or a powerful person, but instead, he came to this world as a baby. And he came as a person who would experience all the things that you and I experience, including injustice. Now, some of the authors of Scripture tells us that Jesus actually understands how we feel when we're treated unfairly, and that he stands with us in it. In other words, he literally goes into the fires of injustice right beside us, so we don't have to do it alone. So does knowing Jesus is with us, does that magically make injustice easier to take? Unfortunately, that's not how it works. Jesus' presence with us doesn't change what we're experiencing, but it does change how we experience it. You see, it can remind us of the fact we're not alone in it. We've never actually been alone, and we never will be. And that can give us the faith that we need to stand in the fire until something changes. Because remember, you don't have to face injustice alone. And maybe you can relate to these 3 guys who were in the fire. Maybe you've experienced some suffering that goes along with a painful and unfair treatment, and you're trying to keep your faith as you're just standing there in the flames and in the fire. And so what I want to do today is I want to give you some ideas of steps you can take. Now, as we've said, as we go through this series, we're going to give you a small step, which is kind of a beginning entrance, into what you could do. There's a next step that if you're ready to kind of proceed on the journey, and then there's a big step that's something that will require a lot of courage and a lot of boldness, but I think you can do it. So we want to start with the small step, and a good first step that you can take towards a better tomorrow for yourself is simply to remember that God is with you. Is to simply remember that God is with you. To remember that you are made in God's image. And that means that no matter what injustice you're experiencing, you have value. You have worth. You deserve to be honored and respected. You deserve justice. And God doesn't want you just to fight for it or to walk through what you're experiencing alone. So find strength in the fact that God not only sees your struggle, but that He's standing with you in it. So simply remember that God is with you. Then if you're experiencing injustice right now, or you're dealing with injustice that has happened to you in the past, maybe your next step is to simply talk about it. And if you feel comfortable, we would encourage you to speak up, to share it with people in your life who care about you, who want to see you and help you move towards justice alongside you. You see, we want this space that we've created when we gather in person to be a safe place. We want this space online to be a safe place for you to do just that. So today, if you feel ready, I would encourage you to begin by share what you've experienced. And maybe that means sharing it with God in prayer, or maybe that means opening up to a close friend or a trusted adult like a parent or a guardian, or maybe your small group leader. But begin to talk about it. And then finally, when we experience injustice, it can be easy to feel like God has left us or forgotten us. Now remember those three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that we just read about? It may not have been what they wanted or how they expected, but God literally sent somebody into the flames so they wouldn't have to deal with it alone. And so I think the big step that we can take is to look for the people God sent to show up for us. Is to look for the people that God sent to show up for us. Who are the people that are standing in the furnace with you? Who are the ones that God has sent to stand in the fire beside you? Maybe it's a friend who listens or cares about your pain. Maybe it's an activist that you follow on TikTok or some kind of social media working to move towards injustice and working to fight towards injustice and to say, no, we're going to look towards making the world better. Or maybe it's the small group leader or the parent that's willing to stand up and be a voice for you. Those are people that God put in your life so you wouldn't have to face injustice alone. Now, finally, there's one other person in this story that I really think we need to look at, which is King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, of course, and I say that hopefully that none of you are throwing people into a raging fire because they won't worship your statue. But I think there could be times that when we're honest, we would admit that maybe we've participated in some harsh or unfair treatment of others. Maybe we caused it ourselves, or maybe we're more like the people in the crowd when all this was going on with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where we stand by and we watch as injustice happens to somebody else. And if that's you, I want you to know this, that just because you've been that person before, it doesn't mean that you have to stay that person now. You can change. And maybe the best step you can take towards justice right now is to choose to no longer contribute to injustice. Maybe you need to own it and apologize and ask for forgiveness from God and even from the other person that you've offended. Maybe for you to choose to take one step towards justice, maybe even for the first time, is the step you need to take today. Because remember, you don't have to face injustice alone. You don't have to face injustice alone. And that's actually one of the reasons that when we gather together in person, we have small groups. Because our small groups, as we say this every week, they're a group of people that are here for you, to pray with you, to learn from you, to show you that they are for you. They're people who literally will very likely get into the fire right alongside of you, and that's a big deal. So if you've experienced injustice and you're comfortable sharing, would you consider sharing that with your group? Maybe if you're not here in person, you consider sharing that with somebody else. And if you haven't experienced injustice, if somebody does share with you, would you be willing to listen and care for them and provide the support that they need? Because the truth is this, is that in this world, injustice is going to continue. And people are always going to want more power, be more threatened by people who are different, or look for ways to control or hurt other people. But I truly believe that if we commit to being the kind of people who move towards justice, even if it's just one step at a time, we will see that we can take steps towards a better tomorrow every day. So as we wrap up today, I want you to think about this particular question. What's one injustice you or someone you know has experienced? What's one injustice you or someone you know has experienced? Well, thank you so much for joining us today and checking out the second installment of our series, One Step. Again, we hope that it's been beneficial to you as we've talked about this idea of working towards justice, of working against injustice, to make sure that things are right and fair and equal for everybody. And maybe for you today, maybe you just simply need to acknowledge that God is with you. Or maybe you need to talk about it. Or maybe you need to say, you know what, I need to look for the people that God has placed in my life to help me get through this struggle. Wherever you are in this journey, know that we are for you. And we'd love to have you come and join us in person. Again, we meet on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. in the youth room here at New Hope Church. And we'd love to have you come and join us as we continue this series over the next couple weeks, talking about how we can take steps towards creating a better tomorrow today. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day and an amazing week, and we hope to see you soon.